And speaking of over, one thing is over before it even started, and that, my friends, is the impeachment of the 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Problem is, Trump's not the president right now. So how do you impeach him? The answer is you don't. This is probably dead on arrival, though they're going to make a big pissing match about it, a big show, a big hoopla, if you will, all about this unconstitutional act taking place by a vengeful elite political party. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an article from the Gateway pundit Christina Layla. Trump officially responds to the articles of impeachment, calls the process unconstitutional. Now, you may have heard the other day that Trump did respond to the ridiculous impeachment that only makes people like Trump more. All right. But, ladies and gentlemen, they didn't all read the actual response to you. They give you cliff notes, right? They give you cliff notes. So I'm here to talk about it a little bit, go through it a little bit, and get the rest of the story to you and let you decide what you really want to do with it, what you want to make of it. At this point, right, like many of you, I'm kind of tired of it, right? I sick and tired of hearing about the left persecuting this guy and then coming after us. Not sick of hearing about it as in I don't want to know about it. What I'm talking about is I'm sick of hearing about it. I'm sick of hearing about it because I'm sick of it happening, right? It gets old. I mean, don't you feel the weight on your shoulders, guys? Don't you feel the tension in the air? You can't even be yourself anymore when you go outside. Enough is enough. I'm sick and tired of it. I'm sick and tired of it. And I know that so many of you guys are too, but it's one more hill, guys. We got to keep marching forward. Never going to give up. We have to keep pushing for what's right. So we're going to have to go through this. And hopefully Trump is able to expose more of the bad guys. All right. That's all we can hope for is more exposure, more of the revealing of the man behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. Folks, we need to make sure that President Donald Trump is remembered for the great president that he was. And who knows what'll happen in 2024, the great president he might be again. All right. But I want to get this out to you. I want you to see it. I want you to hear it. And I want to know what you think of it, folks. All right. Trump officially responds to the articles of impeachment. We're reading Donald Trump on Tuesday officially responded to the articles of impeachment filed by rabid House Democrats last month. The House of Representatives impeached President Donald Trump with a 232 to 197 vote on January 13th for inciting an insurrection at the Capitol. All right, folks, January 13th, they impeached him. Now here we are, February 3rd, I believe it is. Yeah, February 3rd, going into this garbage in the next couple days. Absolute garbage. 45 senators have already voted that the impeachment is unconstitutional since he's no longer in office and can't be removed if convicted. Obviously, we all know why they're going after this. It's for the political theater, and it's also so that if somehow they pull this garbage off, they're hoping that it'll turn into he can't run again in 2024. Plain and simple. All right, guys? The constitutional provision requires that a person actually hold the office to be impeached. Duh. Right? Trump said this in his response. Since the 45th president of the United States is no longer president, all right, the clause shall be removed from office or on impeachment for the clause shall be removed from office on impeachment for is impossible for the Senate to accomplish, meaning he's not the president. You can't impeach him. Can't. Doesn't work like that. All right. Let's read through the whole thing. All right. So we're not just speculating, so we can actually see what the legal answer to this was from Mr. Trump. To the Honorable, the members of the U.S. Senate, the 45th President of the United States, Donald John Trump, through his counsel, Bruce L. Castor Jr. and David Schoen, hereby responds to the articles of impeachment lodged against him by the United States House of Representatives by breaking the allegations out into 8 averments and respectfully represents. 1. The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment and that the president shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Answer 1. Admitted in part, denied in part, as not relevant to any matter properly before the Senate. It is admitted that the constitutional provision at Averment 1 is accurately reproduced. It's accurately reproduced. It's denied, though, that the quoted provision currently applies to the 45th President of the United States since he's no longer the president. The constitutional provision requires that a person actually hold office to be impeached. Since the 45th President is no longer the president, the clause shall be removed from the office on impeachment for is impossible. All right. It's impossible. All right. I'm going to have to click into this to make it work here. All right. It's impossible for the Senate to accomplish, and thus the current proceeding before the Senate is void ab initio. I don't even know if that's how you say that, but it sounds like it means it doesn't count. As a legal nullity, yep, null and void. That runs patently contrary to the plain language of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution states, judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor. Since removal from office by the Senate of the President is a condition precedent, which must occur before and jointly with disqualification to hold future office, the fact that the Senate presently is unable to remove from office the 45th President whose term has expired means the Averment 1 is therefore irrelevant to any matter before the Senate. Further, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution prohibits any person who has engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States from holding any office under the United States. Folks, you see, he didn't do that. And therefore, since the president didn't act in insurrection or engaging in any sort of rebellion, that charge doesn't count against him, folks. And what they're saying before in the previous paragraph there is that Donald Trump, right, is not the president and therefore cannot be impeached. Plain and simple, plain and simple. Let's go to answer 2. Admitted in part, denied in part, and denied as not irrelevant to any matter properly before the Senate. It is admitted that phrases from Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution are correctly replicated in Averment 2. It's denied that the 45th President engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States. So what he's basically getting at is what they're stating, their reproduction of what it is said in the Constitution. He's saying, yeah, you're correctly quoting the Constitution, but you're not correctly quoting, you're not correctly depicting what President Donald Trump took part in. It's denied that the 45th president engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States. The 45th president believes and therefore avers that as a private citizen, the Senate has no jurisdiction over his ability to hold office, and for the Senate to take action on the averment would constitute a bill of attainder in a violation of Article 1, Section 9 of the U.S. Constitution. All right, folks, that again is stating that he's a private citizen. The Senate cannot impeach him. Let's move forward. The 45th president asks that the Senate dismiss Averment 2 relating to the 14th Amendment. Obviously, there is another form that this goes with, and that form is obviously the article of impeachment and what they are charging Trump with. That's what this is. He is responding to that in these answers. That's a whole podcast onto itself where we could go back and forth, and I may do that if enough people request it, but you can always look up the impeachment charges and take a look at what I am responding to by going through this, ladies and gentlemen. In his conduct while President of the United States and in violation of his constitutional oath faithfully to execute the office of President of the United States and to the best of his ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. All right? This is the third charge, right? And what they're saying is that the president himself did not execute his oath properly. In fact, as president, he violated his oath and hurt the country. That's what they're saying, which is ridiculous. And his answer to that is denied, irrelevant to any matter properly before the Senate. It is denied that the 45th president of the United States ever engaged in a violation of his oath of office. To the contrary, at all times, Donald J. Trump fully and faithfully executed his duties as president of the United States, and at all times acted to the best of his ability to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States while never engaging in any high crimes or misdemeanors. Since the 45th president is no longer president, the clause shall be removed from office on impeachment for referenced at averment 1 above is impossible. And the current proceeding before the Senate is void ab initio as a legal nullity, patently contrary to the plain language of the Constitution, as the present proceedings are moot and thus a nullity, since the 45th president cannot be removed from office, right? He can't be removed from his office. He doesn't occupy it, right, guys? Averment 3 is irrelevant to any matter properly before the Senate, folks. So that goes into this for Donald J. Trump, right? Donald J. Trump engaged, this is another charge, in high crimes and misdemeanors by inciting violence against the government of the United States. In that, on January 6, 2021, pursuant to the 12th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the House of Representatives, and the Senate met at the United States Capitol for a joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. In the months preceding the joint session, President Trump repeatedly issued false statements asserting that the presidential election results were the product of widespread fraud and should not be accepted by the American people or certified by state or federal officials, which we still believe that, and which we would like to see more evidence of, because we see plenty, all right, of substantiating evidence surrounding what could be mass amounts of fraud, all right? We just need to see the data. And maybe, just maybe, this impeachment will spell impending doom for the left. Maybe, just maybe, they invited something upon them that they shouldn't have, right? 4, admitted in part, denied in part, and denied as irrelevant to any matter properly before the Senate, right? He's admitting part of this and denying part of this. He's admitting, all right, that on January 6, 2021, a joint session of Congress did happen. It did meet with the vice president. The House and the Senate did count the Electoral College votes. It's admitted that after the November election, the 45th president exercised his First Amendment right under the Constitution to express his belief that the election results were suspect, since, with very few exceptions, under the convenient guise of COVID-19 pandemic safeguards, states' election laws and procedures were changed by local politicians and judges without the necessary approvals from state legislatures. Insufficient evidence exists upon which a reasonable jurist could conclude that the 45th president's statements were accurate or not, and he therefore denies they were false. Like all Americans, the 45th president is protected by the First Amendment. Indeed, he believes and therefore avers that the United States is unique on earth in that its governing documents, the Constitution and Bill of Rights, specifically and intentionally protect unpopular speech from government retaliation. If the First Amendment protected only speech the government deemed popular in current American culture, it would be no protection at all. Since the 45th president is no longer the president, the constitutional clause at averment 1 above shall be removed from office on impeachment for is impossible since the 45th president does not hold office anymore, and the current proceeding before the Senate is again void ab initio as a legal nullity, rendering averment for irrelevant to any matter properly before the Senate. It's all just stacking up, it's like the 12 days of Christmas or whatever. He has the right. And there's plenty of evidence. And the courts never heard any of it. That's the problem. And we all know that. So whenever any of these schmucks talk about how there is no evidence, it's not that there's no evidence. It's that the court needs to hear the evidence for once. For once. This is the fifth charge. Shortly before the joint session commenced, President Trump addressed a crowd at the Capitol Ellipse in Washington, D.C. There, he reiterated false claims that we won the election and won it by a landslide. And I still believe we did, folks. Answer 5 to that. Trump is admitting in part, denying in part. He's admitting that Trump did address a crowd in the Capitol Ellipse on January 6, 2021, as is his right under the First Amendment to the Constitution, and expressed his opinion that the election results were suspect, as is contained in the full recording of the speech. To the extent Averment 5 alleges his opinion is factually in error, the 45th president denies this allegation. That means that the president is saying there is voter fraud. Screw yourself. You're going to hear about it. That's what he's saying there, ladies and gentlemen. He also willfully made statements. This is the next charge. He also willfully made statements that in context encouraged and foreseeably resulted in lawless action at the Capitol, such as, quote, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. Thus, incited by President Trump, members of the crowd he had addressed in an attempt to, among other objectives, interfere with the joint session's solemn constitutional duty to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election, unlawfully breached and vandalized the Capitol, injured and killed law enforcement personnel, menaced members of Congress, the vice president, and congressional personnel, and engaged in other violent, deadly, destructive, and seditious acts. Well, first off, folks, I want to say something. Why isn't the governor of Oregon impeached? Why isn't the mayor of Portland impeached? Why isn't the governor of Illinois impeached? The mayor of Chicago impeached? The governor of Michigan, right? Why isn't she impeached? Why isn't Wisconsin, Kenosha, right? Why aren't they impeached? Why isn't Governor Inslee of Washington State impeached? There's a whole line of jerk wagons that should be impeached well before Donald Trump. And they deserve it, ladies and gentlemen. They deserve it. This is going to be easy. They've got plenty of proof about this, and we'll talk about it in a second if they don't say it in this. Answer 6, admitted in part, denied in part. It's admitted that persons unlawfully breached and vandalized the Capitol, that people were injured and killed, and that law enforcement is currently investigating and prosecuting those who were responsible. Seditious acts is a term of art with a legal meaning, and the use of that phrase in the article of impeachment is thus denied in the context in which it is used. It is denied that President Trump incited the crowd to engage in destructive behavior. It's denied that the phrase, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore, had anything to do with the action at the Capitol. And remember, folks, the left is going to so use that because, remember, they take everything literal. Everything is literal. They are the PC fun police. You can't haze. You can't have fun. You can't break in a group. You can't become a family. No, that behavior is mean. And you need a hug and a safe space, ladies and gentlemen. So you can't say you don't fight like hell, you're going to lose the country, because that means you're going to hurt something. Shut the F up, lefties. Just shut up and cry in your safe spaces so we can keep laughing at you. He's denying it had anything to do with the action at the Capitol. He's saying it was clearly about the need to fight for election security in general, as evidenced by the recording of the speech. It's denied that the president President Trump did not intend to interfere with the counting of electoral votes. As is customary, members of Congress challenged electoral vote submissions by states under a process written into the congressional rules, allowing for the respective houses of Congress to debate whether a state submitted electoral electoral votes should be counted. In 2017, Democratic members of Congress repeatedly challenged the electoral votes submitted from states where President Trump prevailed. In 2021, Republican members of Congress challenged the electoral votes submitted from states where President Biden prevailed. All right. The purpose of the joint sessions of Congress in 2017 and on January 6, 2021 was for members of Congress to fulfill their duty to be certain the Electoral College votes were properly submitted and any challenges thereto properly addressed under congressional rules. Congress's duty, therefore, was not just to certify the presidential election. Its duty was to first determine whether the certification of the presidential election vote was warranted and permissible under its rules. See, Trump is still on that. His team is still on that. I believe we're going to see the revealing of a lot of stuff at the trial. I think, between you and me, I don't think that, I mean, it would be so stupid for the left to call witnesses, because then that would open up a treasure trove of witnesses for Trump to call. You see where I'm coming from? Jovan Pulitzer, however you say his name, all those folks like that investigated the algorithms and the fraud stuff. You don't think that Trump would be calling them and showing the evidence? If the left calls any witnesses for this impeachment trial, they are literally committing collective party suicide. Plain and simple, ladies and gentlemen. Plain and simple. This is the 7th. President Trump's conduct on January 6, 2021 followed his prior efforts to subvert the certification of the results of the 2020 presidential election. Those prior efforts included a phone call on January 2nd, 2021, during which President Trump urged the Secretary of State, the Secretary of the State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, to find enough votes to overturn the Georgia presidential election results, and threatened Secretary Raffensperger if he failed to do so. Again, look, they're playing with words and interpretations. You remember my podcast that I did? We watched and listened to the entire call between Trump and Raffensperger, and at no time did he ever do that. All right. This was a discreet, all right, confidential, full-on private legal discussion on how they could reach a settlement to the lawsuit. Plain and simple. That's a normal legal conversation to have, and the Democrats are lying. 7. All right. This is their answer. Admitted in part, denied as irrelevant to any matter properly before the Senate. It's admitted that President Trump spoke on the telephone with Secretary Raffensperger and multiple other parties, including several attorneys for both parties, on January 2nd, 2021. Or someone, all right, at his direction, surreptitiously, and somebody at Brad Raffensperger's direction, or Brad Raffensperger himself, surreptitiously recorded the call and subsequently made it public. The recording accurately reflects the content of the conversation. It is denied, though, President Trump made any offers or any effort, to subvert the certification of the results of the 2020 presidential election. It is denied that the word "find" was inappropriate in context, as President Trump was expressing his opinion that if the evidence was carefully examined, one would find that you have many that aren't even signed, and you have many that are forgeries. All right. It is denied that President Trump threatened Raffensperger. It's denied that President Trump acted improperly in that telephone call in any way. Since the 45th president is no longer the president, the constitutional clause from Amendment 1 shall be removed from office on impeachment is impossible, since the 45th president does not hold office. Again, it's like the 12 days. You know what I mean? It could be like, since the 45th president is no longer president, the constitutional clause from Amendment 1 shall be removed from office on impeachment 4 is impossible. Since he's not the president, it's void ab initio. Anyway, all right, I'm done singing. That's probably like the stupidest thing I ever put on video. But you're going to have to deal with it. By the way, when you hear me make word errors, when you hear me read, because I'm noticing myself do it, and then I slightly pause and screw the word up, it's because I'm learning the flow, right? I'm teaching myself how to flow from paragraph to paragraph, from article to article. right? And sometimes you lose your place, or sometimes you have to transition between page and other page. And so I'm learning how to smoothly correct for that. All right. That's usually something that takes folks in this business years to do. I'm going to try to figure this thing out in a couple months so you can have a much better show on my part, ladies and gentlemen. And we'll also get the camera angle fixed and stuff. I know that for this episode and the last episode, it's been a little wonky. Like I said, we've been upgrading and changing the set. As you can see, I have this big empty shelf behind me that I thought my computer was going to be able to go on. But no, that didn't work out. So now I got to figure out something. By the way, folks, that'd be pretty fun. Any suggestions? I got a big shelf here and a big shelf there, folks. If any of you have any suggestions for what I should put on it, leave it in the comment section below or email me directly, JAMESLANE at AmericanReveille.com. This is the 8th charge. In all this, President Trump gravely endangered the security of the United States and its institutions of government. He threatened the integrity of the democratic system. He interfered with the peaceful transition of power. He imperiled a co-equal branch of government. He thereby betrayed his trust as president. This sounds like Nancy Pelosi talking. To the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Denied as irrelevant to any matter properly before the Senate. It is denied that President Trump ever endangered the security of the United States and its institutions of government. It is denied that he threatened the integrity of the democratic system, interfered with the peaceful transition of power, and imperiled a co-equal branch of government. It is denied he betrayed his trust as president to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Rather, the 45th president of the United States performed admirably in his role as president at all times, doing what he thought was in the best interests of the American people. The 45th president, he believes, ladies and gentlemen, he believes and therefore avers that in the United States, the people choose their president, and that he was properly chosen in 2016 and sworn into office in 2017, serving his term to the best of his ability in comportment with his oath of office. Since the 45th president is no longer the president, yada, 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 yada. You know the rest of that part. Averment 8, irrelevant to any matter. All right. This void ab initio, however you say it, makes it irrelevant to the extent there are factual allegations made against the 45th president, all right, of the United States contained in Article 1 that are not specifically addressed above. Said allegations are denied, and strict proof at the time of hearing is demanded. You see that, folks? You see that little trap? Sorry, I got this new microphone stand here and I'm still wrestling with it. That's why my camera angle on my end's a little screwed up as well. See, I don't want this big stick right in your face. You see that? It's like bam, bam, punching you right in the face. So I don't want that. I got to figure out a better. I should have really thought about this, but that's all right. We're going to make it work. This thing's not the cheapest of mic stands, so you're going to just have to deal with that. Look at this thing. For those listening, I've got this heavy duty mic stand, this desktop mic stand that I got now, and it's kind of obnoxious, and it's blocking my face a little. Maybe if I bring it up just a little, there we go. Look at this. Look at this. Boom. Boom, boom, boom. For those who've been listening to me for a long time, I know you don't care that I'm doing this live on the air, well, recorded on the air. And for those new people that haven't been listening, no, not all of my shows are me talking to myself about my mic, but people seem to think it's funny. So why not? Why not keep talking to myself about this microphone? No, just kidding. It actually has a holster. Look at this. It has like a hand grip on it, right? It's like a tactical mic stand. Look at this thing. So if somebody breaks in my house and I'm out of bullets for some reason, because I'm either just a really bad shot because I'm rusty, or, because for some reason they're impervious to bullets, I can beat them to death with my mic stand. All right. Only the best physical torture for the people who break into my house and try to hurt my family. And by the way, By the way, lefties, for those that are going to have a freaking heart attack for me saying that, it is in my legal right to defend myself if somebody breaks into my house and intends to hurt my family. That is a hypothetical situation that I'm bringing up. And because it's 2021, for legal reasons, I have to say this. All right. And I mean it. All right. So don't worry. All right. If nobody breaks in my house and tries to hurt my family, we're good. Merry Christmas. Legal defenses. Back to this. It's getting awkward. To this, look, shift your attention away from the pasty white guy with the really wacky, patchy gray and black goatee. Just see that? Just turn this way to the legal defenses. The honorable, all right? This is to the honorable members of the United States Senate. I wasn't going to read this when I first started this episode. I was going to read part of the defense, but we're right here anyway. And you're going to look at me like I'm a schmuck because I didn't go through the whole thing. So we might as well go through the whole thing. It's just a couple more pages, all right? This is another letter to the Senate. The 45th president of the United States, Donald John Trump, through his counsel, Bruce Castor, David Schoen, yada, 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 avers that the articles of impeachment lodged against him by the U.S. House of Representatives is facially and substantively flawed and otherwise unconstitutional and must be dismissed with prejudice. In support thereof, the 45th president respectfully represents, right? This is what the 45th president is going to represent and say in support of everything that we just went over. One, the Senate of the U.S. lacks jurisdiction over the 45th president. He holds no public office, so he can't be removed from any public office, and the Constitution limits the authority of the Senate in cases of impeachment to removal from office as the prerequisite active remedy allowed the Senate under our Constitution. All right. 2, the Senate of the United States lacks jurisdiction over the 45th president because he holds no public office from which he can be removed, rendering the article of impeachment moot and justiciable. I don't know. How do you say that word? Non-justiciable, whatever. It's one of those right there. All right. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's either justiciable or justiciable. All right. It's a non-justiciable question. 3, should the Senate act on the article of impeachment initiated in the House of Representatives, it will have passed a bill of attainder in violation of Article 1, Section 9, Clause 3, right? This is the summary. 4, the article of impeachment misconstrues protected speech and fails to meet the constitutional standard for any impeachable offense. 5, the House of Representatives deprived the 45th president of due process of law in rushing to issue the article of impeachment by ignoring its own procedures and precedents going back to the mid-19th century. The lack of process included, but was not limited to, its failure to conduct any meaningful committee review or investigation, engage in any full and fair, there we go, consideration of evidence in support of the article, as well as the failure to conduct any full and fair discussion by allowing the 45th president's positions to be heard in the House chamber. No exigent circumstances under the law were present excusing the House of Representatives' rush to judgment. The House of Representatives' action in depriving the 45th president of due process of law created a special category of citizenship for a single individual, the 45th president of the United States. Should this body not act in favor of the 45th president, the precedent set by the House of Representatives would become such that such persons as the 45th president similarly situated no longer enjoy the rights of all American citizens guaranteed by the Bill of Rights. The action by the House make clear that in their opinion, the 45th president does not enjoy the protections of liberty upon which this great nation was founded, where free speech and indeed free political speech form the backbone of all American liberties. None of the traditional reasons permitting the government to act in such haste were present. They didn't happen. There was no exigent circumstances. The House had no reason to rush its proceedings, disregard its own precedents and procedures, engage in zero committee or other investigations, and fail to grant the accused his, quote, opportunity to be heard in person or through counsel. All basic tenets of due process of law. There was no exigency, as evidenced by the fact that the House waited until after the end of the president's term to even send the articles over. And there was thus no legal or moral reason for the House to act as it did. Political hatred has no place in the administration of justice anywhere in America, especially in the Congress of the United States. All right. The article of impeachment violates the 45th president's right to free speech and thought guaranteed under the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. Very true. The article is constitutionally flawed in that it charges multiple instances of allegedly impeachable conduct in a single article. By charging multiple alleged wrongs in one article, the House of Representatives have made it impossible to guarantee compliance with the constitutional mandate in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6 that permits a conviction only be by at least 2/3 of the members. The House charge fails by interweaving differing allegations rather than breaking them out into counts of alleged individual instances of misconduct. Rule XXIII, that's 23, if I'm not mistaken, of the Rules of Procedure and Practice in the Senate when sitting on impeachment trials provides, in pertinent part, that an article of impeachment shall not be divisible thereon. Because the article at issue here alleges multiple wrongs in the single article, it would be impossible to know if 2/3 of the members agreed on the entire article or just on parts as the basis for vote to convict. What they're saying here, if you're not following, is that in the rule book, right, there's a playbook, there's rules to this shit, to this impeachment. Excuse my language there. That just slipped out of nowhere. I didn't even expect it. It just went right out of my mouth. What they're saying here is that the rules show that you have to put one charge per one impeachment article. And this impeachment article is like a mishmash. It's like a casserole of different things thrown into one. So how could you get hundreds of people to agree on 10 different articles in one article, right? That's not how it's supposed to be done, yet that's how they did it. The House failed to adhere to strict Senate rules and instead chose to make the article as broad as possible intentionally in the hope that some senators might agree with parts and other senators agree with other parts, but that when these groups of senators were added together, the House might achieve the appearance of 2/3 in agreement, when those 2/3 of members in reality did not concur. In reality, they did not concur at all on the same allegations interwoven into an overbroad article designed for such a purpose. All right. Such behavior on the part of the House of Representatives may have a less nefarious reason in the alternative and simply be a byproduct of the haste in which the House unnecessarily acted while depriving the 45th President of the United States of his American right to due process of law. The 45th President of the United States believes and therefore avers that the defect in the drafting of the article requires that senators be instructed that if 2/3 of them fail to find any portion of the article lacking in evidence sufficient for conviction, the entire article fails and should be dismissed. All right. Finally, 8. This is a big one, a very important one. The Chief Justice of the United States is not set to preside over the proceedings contemplated by the Senate, as he would be constitutionally required to do if the House was seeking to have the president removed from office under Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6 of the U.S. Constitution. Once the 45th president's term expired and the House chose to allow jurisdiction to lapse on the article of impeachment, the constitutional mandate for the Chief Justice to preside at all impeachments involving the president evidently disappeared, and he was replaced by a partisan senator who will purportedly act as a juror while ruling on certain issues. The House actions thus were designed to ensure that Chief Justice John Roberts would not preside over the proceedings, which effectively creates an additional appearance of bias, with the proceedings now being supervised by a partisan member of the Senate with a long history of public remarks averse to the 45th president. The 45th president believes and therefore avers that this action of the House of Representatives additionally violated his right to due process of law because the House effectively maneuvered an ally in the Senate into the judge's chair. That is exactly what happened, ladies and gentlemen. That's what you need to see. That is what they're hiding from you. This is not all over the place, and it should be, because the president speaks some very important truths. All right. How can you have an impeachment trial without the Chief Justice over it? right? If the Chief Justice says he doesn't have a duty to do this because it's not an impeachment trial, then they can't have an impeachment trial, right? That's pretty much what's happening here. He doesn't have a constitutional obligation here. So why should the president have a constitutional obligation to show up and be impeached? Because he's not the current sitting president anymore. He doesn't have a constitutional obligation either. Wherefore, Donald John Trump, 45th President of the United States, respectfully requests the honorable members of the Senate of the United States dismiss Article 1, incitement of insurrection, against him as moot and thus in violation of the Constitution, because the Senate lacks jurisdiction to remove from office a man who does not hold office. In the alternative, the 45th President respectfully requests the Senate acquit him on the merits of the allegations raised in the article of impeachment. All right, the allegations respectfully submitted by Bruce Castor, David Schoen, the counsel to the 45th President of the United States, signed and dated February 2nd, 2021. This is the official full response. We deep dove the whole thing, right? And if you really, really want to see this really work well together, right? Pull up the articles of impeachment, put them to the side, right? Put them to one side, and then take these, this response here, and put it on the other side, and then read from one to the other, from one to the other. And it's a hell of an experience. And maybe we should have considered doing that. But, you know, it is what it is. We went through it. We did it raw. We did it the right way, in my opinion, because between you and me, people are bowing left and right. So we have to get this truth out there, right? We have to get the facts out there. People need to know what's going on. And President Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States, he's still fighting for us, folks. So don't lose faith. Don't give up. There's no chance, in my opinion, with this Q stuff. Trump's not coming back to office, all right? At least not until 2024, if that becomes a reality. But you know what he is going to do? He's going to spend every waking minute of his life now exposing these people. And that is a huge help to us, folks, all right? So remember, the Constitution gives us, the people, the power. All right. President Trump is one of us. He's part of the group. We have it in our hands to do the right thing, to pressure the right people, to peacefully put the squeeze on the local officials with the right influence, the right information, right? To empower citizens with knowledge. We have the right to do all of these things. We have the right to use our free speech. We are being oppressed. Yes. We are being oppressed, but that doesn't mean that we can't outsmart the system. All right. Head to the website, www.americanreveille.com. Do me this favor. All right. Hit it up. Hit it up, hit it up, hit it up. If you loved this podcast, if you like what we're doing and you feel like supporting us, hit the support us tab. We take Bitcoin. You can go on PayPal. We take any amount of donation. We appreciate it greatly. Guys, it really helps. It goes a huge way while we're fighting off this censorship. We have some new articles tracing the real pandemic. It's fantastic. And also, Andrew Penn put out Joe Biden's America Last Agenda, a great one as well. I have another article coming out tonight too. Folks, sign up for the mailing list. Please, please, please. You don't want to lose touch with what we are doing across this country. And please contact us. If you have any feedback, if there's anything you'd like to ask me, if there's any way you believe you can contribute with any of your skill sets, or if you'd like to start building up an American Reveille street team in your neighborhood, please let me know. JAMESLANE at AmericanReveille.com, JAMESLANE@AmericanReveille.com, or you can hit the contact button or go to AmericanReveille.com and then hit the contact button. Folks, we're still on YouTube, so if that's where you're watching us, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a comment, share. But they are shadow banning us. That's why you'll notice that we were getting thousands of views, and now all of a sudden we're barely getting any. That's called shadow banned, all right? So we're moving a lot of our stuff to Odyssey. This is a great platform, ODYSEE.com, all right? Most of my videos are up there. Most of them are up there. And I like them. I think they're a great platform. They're easy to use. It feels like YouTube. So it could be our version of YouTube. Try it out. ODYSEE.com. I'm there as American_Reveille. Of course, the links will be in the description below. And of course, I'm on Rumble, guys. I am on Rumble as well. Head over to rumble.com. Find me American_Reveille. I'm in the comment section below, or I'm in the description section. You can find the link there. Head over here, subscribe, hit the notification bell. I need all the support I can get. We are having a very big hit to our distribution. People are not seeing what we're putting out because they killed Parler. And like I told you in the podcast episode, we don't even know if Parler's coming back. So we got to start from scratch. So I need your help, folks. Please help. All right. We can do this together. We really, really can. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, guys, 5-star rating, leave a review, please. Please, please, please. That's a big deal. Subscribe there. Follow me there. Share, share, share. If you are an audio listener, I am on most platforms. American Reveille Podcast on most platforms, folks. If you're a listener and you know people who like AM radio and different things like that, tell them about the American Reveille, please. I need your help, and I'm depending on you to really spread the word, all right? We're doing everything we can. You know that I barely sleep and eat. I'm putting it out. I'm putting the hours